Hi, I'm Raymond Douglas and welcome to my man cave. Well, rather tool shed, or my special place of reflection. The Inside Out perspective takes a look at life's challenges and its effects and asks one simple question: what race are you running? Good day and welcome to another episode of the Inside Out perspective. Today's episode is called Consistency is the Key to Truth. And why am I entitled at that is simply because there's an immense amount of research coming out and available on the internet, especially from the likes of Jay Smith and Dan Brubaker and those group of scholars about the inconsistency of the records of the Quran. More specifically, we're going to have a look at Shabir Ally's retractment of his statements of the past. And 7 years ago, this is what Shabir Ally was saying on his YouTube channel.
The Quran was recited by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a conduit from God. He then proclaimed this message out loud, and his followers heard that message, they internalized it, they practiced it, and they also memorized the words and wrote down those words on a variety of writing material.
So here we have Shabir Ally making the statement that Muhammad was the conduit of Allah for the revelation of the Quran, that his companions memorized the Quran, and his companions also wrote the Quran down.
Was there any change in the process?
Early Muslims, as far as we can see, were a pious community, and they feared God, and they were always worried about their retribution before God on the Day of Judgment should they do something wrong. So within 2 years of the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Quran was then preserved in writing and kept with the Caliph at the time, Abu Bakr.
Notice the question is, was there any change in the terms of memorizing and writing down the Quran? And Shabir Ally is very adamant that the Muslims at Muhammad's time were extremely pious and they feared Allah, so much so that they didn't want their life in eternity to be affected by it. So they were diligent in memorizing each and every word, and at the death of Prophet Muhammad, they wrote down the Quran. So what does he say next? Why was it written down is the important question, and this is how he answers that.
With the written record in place, there is more clarity in case someone was a little bit fuzzy in terms of what he remembered. If one did not remember how to pronounce a word exactly, precisely as it should be pronounced, one can always double check with the written record.
Note what he says here. It was written down to ensure that there is no fuzziness in the memory of the Muslims at Muhammad's time. So it was written down so they had a secure record of what it is. Now let's go and see what he says now, currently. Let the Quran speak. 22nd of May, 2020. This is what he says.
And it's referred to as the Sana manuscript. That manuscript has 2 layers of Quranic writing. The lower layer has been scraped off, and the upper layer has the Quranic text written over. The lower text that has been scraped off has some variation from what Muslims are reading in today's text. So how do we explain this difference, and why was that Quranic manuscript scraped off? When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, received the revelation initially, it did not matter at that stage so much that the exact words of the Quran had to be relayed from one person to another.
Shabir Ally is making reference here to the Sunni manuscript, which is understood to be one of the oldest manuscripts available of the Quran. Clearly, he's saying here that there are variants in it. There's 2 texts. There's an underlying text which was cleaned off, and there's a new text which was written on. And there's variance between the 2. So suddenly, what happened to those pious Muslims which feared Allah and their life in eternity? Suddenly there's a little bit of a rattling of the cage. He's backtracking on what he originally taught about the revelation of the Quran. But he goes further. This is what he then says.
In the initial phase, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did not insist that his companions should, each and every one, just repeat exactly the words of the Quran as he delivered it to them. And it was left to a later decade for the Muslim scholarship to rise to this task of saying, look, people are going around reciting the Quran in a variety of wording, and we cannot attest to the validity of all of those wordings. Let's compile a copy of the Quran that will be checked and verified by the community at large, one to whose wording we can attest and verify that, yes, this is a valid representation. Messages delivered by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, might have been rephrased by some of his companions as they transmitted that information from one person to another.
Notice for a second time in the same interview, he confirms that the exact words of the Quran were not important to Muhammad. And we can see that in hadiths where there were variations of the reciting of the Quran. There is a description to that hadith in the description box. Then he goes on to say, a decade later, did you get that? That's 10 years of fuzzy recording and memorizing of the Quran. 10 years. They need to get a representation of what the text or the revelation actually was. Notice, a representation. It is not the exact wordings. It is not the copy which is held in heaven. But now Shabir Ally is saying it's only a representation. So according to Shabir Ally, where does Surah 85 come from? The fuzzy memory or from the original? So how does Shabir Ally go and conclude? He concludes it in the following manner.
Now, we have this Quran that is recited in a variety of recitations and with slight variation.
So his conclusion is that the result is that there are a variety of different variants of the Quran in their readings still today. But don't worry, these don't have any great effect on the Islamic faith. But does it? Let's have a look at just some of those variants, and I'm going to just point out two. Here's the first one. Here's a manuscript where there have been 9 insertations after the revelation of the Quran, after it was written down in a reasonable manner of what was first relieved, where they had to go and add the word Allah into the Quran. In other words, the pious Muslims of Muhammad time forgot who the God of the revelation was, and they need to come back at a later stage and add it in. Now you're going to say, oh, but that's the Russian manuscript. Let's have a look at another manuscript, the Topai copy, which is a more important one. Here we have the same problem, where the word Allah needs to be inserted back into the text to show that the revelation comes from the God of Islam, Allah. And again I ask, how can you forget who is telling you the story? And what are you going to do now? You're going to say, oh, but this interview, Shabir Ally was talking about the Sahih manuscript. Okay, so let's have a look at what the Sahih manuscript has to say. And here it is. Look at the insertions, look at the deletions, look at the changes. There is not a single manuscript available today which has not been changed. So what the Muslims have gone and done is they've gone and changed their Quranic manuscripts to meet the 1924 Hafs Cairo edition of the Quran. So in other words, we can conclude simply that the Quran was compiled in 1924 as the Hafs edition, not 1,400 years ago, as Islam claims. So the question is, simply and stands still today, what race are you running?